Hey Jen,
Hey Adam, how are you?
good. Thanks for making the time to chat today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, the intent of these conversations is we wanted to have the opportunity to interview and have conversations with awesome people like you to really highlight the people and the heart and soul of the work we do in our industry. And I've worked with you and known you for a long time, and I'm excited to have this conversation and see which way it goes.
Yeah. I'm a little scared. Let's see what happens.
Who knows? Who knows, right? Can you start off by introducing yourself and a little bit about your agency?
Yeah, so my name is Jennifer White. I own Bright Futures Families Surrogacy, which some people may know as some of its kind of DBA names like Colorado Surrogacy, Montana Surrogacy, New England Surrogacy. At some point, we had all of those locations, and at some point a couple of years ago, we decided to put our arms all the way around all of them. And so that's why we utilize the name Bright Futures Families now. All of the others still exist. It's just that it was always one company, and so it just is making it a little more unified as to be one company altogether. Um, and that's kind of our agency. We are a full service matching program. We are licensed in New York, so I'm one of, I think, 38 agencies out there that can actually say that I am a surrogacy agency, as opposed to a matching program, but we do both. And we support families from the moment they decide that they want to pursue surrogacy all the way through until baby is born and afterwards.
That's great. Jen, can you share a little bit about your background and how you got into the business?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a convoluted story for me. So, I experienced, my husband and I experienced infertility. We went through 7 years of the dreaded unexplained infertility. Went to see an REI, went through everything. And I mean, we could talk a lot about like the finances and how much this stuff costs, but we couldn't afford it, is what it really came down to. And so we had actually decided that we were not going to be parents. That was the end of our journey. And uh, we are those jerks that it happens to, right? Is you give up and suddenly you get pregnant. And so we do have one kiddo who is 19 years old right now. I guess I'm supposed to keep this not with time, but they are a teenager in college, I guess is the better
That's
way to say that.
19.
But while we were going through infertility, my sister was watching us really struggle. And she was a young attorney, and she actually donated eggs in our honor to a single gay male, and it was an open known donation, which at the time, 20 plus years ago was really, really unusual. And she got the legal agreement and she was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. This is happy law. And she's like, I want to go into happy law one day. So at the time she was a hedge fund attorney, and that was in the time of all the scary hedge fund attorney, like, yeah, all that stuff. And they moved to Colorado after they had the first two kids. And she said, I want to do this. So my husband had been in the military. He was in the military for almost 25 years, but every time we moved, I couldn't go to law school, right? It's too difficult to to go to law school, keep going to get your bar, things like that. So I had always been a paralegal. So when Ellen opened her shop to do this area of law, I was her paralegal, started things up. And I loved it. I loved that part of things. But actually, what I really loved was when the independent matches came to us and they needed that extra hand holding and they needed somebody to make phone calls and figure things out and how is this going to work and explain to them the process. And we moved from England back to the United States at one point, and Ellen said, we got to get you out of this. We need to open an agency." And I think within a few hours, we had already settled on everything and started everything. Granted, we took 4 or 5 months of research and putting everything in place, but the decision was made really quickly because I was like, yes, this is what I love. You're right. This is absolutely what I'm called to do and be. And so we've been I own the agency and we've been doing that for about 10 years now.
That's amazing. Tell me a few things that you're proud of about the agency or that make the agency different.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a great mix of former gestational carriers and those of us who come from other areas in the fertility sphere. I think a lot of, and this is not a dig at agencies that are run only by gestational carriers, but a lot of times focus gets very tilted one way or the other, either to intended parents or to gestational carriers. And so we try really hard to have that, keep that middle ground where we're able to fairly hear and represent both sides and be very balanced in what we do. I think one of the biggest things, though, that makes us unique is that we do not take an agency fee until acceptance of match. And this is breaking news. By the time this becomes ephemeral, it won't be breaking news anymore. But we actually just started, we just changed, and our agency fee now will be taken monthly going forward as well. So not in a giant bolus chunk like is the traditional model, which I'm hoping will make that more accessible and more affordable for a lot of intended parents.
Oh, that's amazing. That is very unique. That is the monthly fee, especially um and the non-committed fee until match.
Mhm.
And having known you for many years, I know making your program accessible has always been really important.
Yeah. Yeah. We want is especially domestic intended parents, which we understand it can be very difficult to access surrogacy because of the cost. We really want to see I can't make it cheaper, unfortunately. I can't make those costs go away. But if we can think of creative ways to make it more accessible to more people and to spread those costs out in a way that's more affordable, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I always think about what we do, and this industry is just full of amazing people and so many amazing people who work so hard and care so much and really are in this to help people build their families and help
Absolutely.
those who help keep those who help them safe, right?
Yep.
But there's also just the reality that we have to run a business that has to be sustainable so we can do that, over time and consistently.
Right.
And part of that dynamic now, I think, for everybody across all segments, is the rising cost, but I think especially in surrogacy.
Yeah.
What's your read on the cost of surrogacy and how it's changing and what's driving the increase?
I there's a couple things, and I mean some for better, some for worse. And I mean there are definitely there is a level of the fact that surrogacy compensation, people keep going, oh, it's gotten out of control, it's gotten out of control. Well, if you follow it by terms of inflation, it really has grown mostly with inflation. There have been some big bumps at times where things really jump and change, but it could be that it didn't jump and change for a long time, and then all of a sudden the norm changes. Um, Definitely, and I'm not digging on any one of them because I definitely have utilized these services as well. But I think that there's a lot of consulting services out there for gestational carriers that the carrier comes to that consulting service and then they're sent out to other agencies, things like that. So they'll try to match them with the best agency for them. And I think on the gestational carrier side, it's wonderful for them. And I'm absolutely not taking away because it is an amazing thing, but the carriers don't realize that the agencies pay for those referrals. And so while all of us who, avail of those services agree we're not going to pass those on directly to intended parents, it means that every intended parent is going to bear that cost because ultimately, like you said, it's a business and it's going to go against our bottom line. And so it's going to raise the cost for all intended parents across the board, right? That means we now have to raise our agency fees so that we can pay those referral fees if we choose to do that. And so I think it's just a knowledge that, like some people need to just be educated that using those services, they're wonderful. Again, not taking away from any of them that do this, but they just need to educate that that's part of it because a lot of them present it as absolutely free to the gestational carriers. And it is free to the gestational carrier, but it's not free to the intended parents.
Yeah, I think those services, and then just in general, what makes them palatable is it seems like the cost to recruit a surrogate continues to
Correct.
go up, which is a function of truly the demand, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what there's always more parents, always, than there will ever be gestational carriers. And it's not because there are not enough people who are willing to step forward, right? Gestational carriers every person who steps forward and raises their hand is amazing. It's the number of people who step forward, raise their hand, who are actually qualified to be gestational carriers, because it's, for better or worse, far more stringent, and I'm going to say for better, than if you're carrying your own pregnancy. A lot of people go, oh, well, my OB says it's totally fine for me to carry with these conditions. And that's great for you to take your own risk on your own behalf. Like we as agencies and as matching programs and as clinics and as attorneys and as mental health professionals, what we're actually looking for is the best interest. We want to make sure that gestational carriers go home whole, happy, and safe. And so if they're taking a risk on behalf of somebody else, we really want to make sure that that's a calculated risk and that they are going to go home whole, happy, and safe afterwards.
Absolutely. Yep, that's what they're doing is an amazing thing. And a lot of times people focus on the compensation, but I mean, I personally don't think most surrogates do it just do it for the compensation. They're doing it to have this honor of helping a family and the privilege of
Absolutely.
helping a family. And it's hard even to sit here as two professionals in this space. It's probably harder for me than you, but from my seat versus yours. But even to say, what should somebody be paid to do what a surrogate does for a family, to put a dollar on that, given the amount of sacrifice, risk, and what they do, the general spirit in the industry is keep the costs as low as possible. And
It,
that's always been our sentiment, right?
correct, but it also should always be what it's worth to that person. And I mean, and I know a lot of agencies do this, a lot of programs do this, that they allow the gestational carriers to set their own compensation. And we do that too. And the reason why is I feel really strongly that it is never, ever my place to tell somebody what that level of risk is worth to them. And so, yes, while it is, of course, in everybody's interest to keep those costs as low as possible, right? We want to do that. uh, But we also, I would never want to tell somebody that the risk isn't what they're saying it's worth it to them isn't. And can we counsel? Can we have some education in the middle about like, yeah, most people can't afford what you're asking for because you're asking for, more than double their salary in 1 year, like those kind of things, especially when they get into the really, really, really big numbers. But it's not my place to tell somebody what that risk level is.
Yeah, and look, we know that the risk overall is low if everything if it,
Generally.
lower end if everything goes well and there's great professionals around.
And I
We've
say, as long as
all
people are being
also
screened appropriately, that's exactly right. That's why we're minimizing those risks.
minimizing the risk, but we've all seen when things go bad, right? And
Absolutely.
so when you see those cases, it really reminds us of there is real risk here, and how do you put a dollar value on that?
Know better, do better always. I know there's a big drumbeat and we have done this actually, is that we actually place life insurance for a gestational carrier now before she even travels for her first medical screening. So before she even takes a birth control pill that she wouldn't have normally taken, like if she was already on it, obviously she's already undergoing that risk herself. But if the clinic says, hey, we'd love for you to go on birth control so we can control your cycle before your screening, life insurance needs to be in place before she does that or before she travels for that clinic. Because even if that risk is minuscule, right? It's teeny tiny, but what happens if she has a reaction and a blood clot because of that, the birth control pill and the estrogen in it that she didn't know about before? What happens if she gets in a car accident on the way and she was traveling there on behalf of those intended parents, right? Those risks are tiny, but they're to the person, if something goes wrong, they're not insignificant to them in that moment. And that's what we always want to make sure we're protecting against.
For sure. We've seen cases where a surrogate did get in a car accident. These things have happened. We're talking very rare examples across thousands and thousands of cases across many,
Correct.
many years of experience. But that's what we often try to solve for within the structure we put in place, the policies, the contracts, to solve for those crazy examples. And like you brought up life insurance, and this is something where my opinion may not be overly popular, but I think life insurance should be higher than what it is. And, when people say, well, gosh, it shouldn't be more than X of a salary or a Y
We
dollar, say we're talking
across the
about a
board for
mother.
us,
We're,
yeah, across the board for us, $750,000. There's
yeah,
nothing less than that. That's
we're
it.
talking about a mother of a family,
Yep.
and there's not really, and it shouldn't be arguable of any other thing. It should just be the most we can get within reason and that's affordable.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that you do that. That's
Yeah, I say because also even if she is a stay-at-home parent, like stay-at-home parents are not just because they don't earn a salary. I've been a stay-at-home parent over the time in my years, but I know how valuable my contribution was to my household, right? Is what it was. And in those times, if I was not there doing the things I was doing, my husband would have had to hire all of those things, that I was doing. So even stay-at-home parents, their value as far as if they were to be lost to their family is immeasurable. And so like even $750,000 feels like the absolute minimum we could do if that were to happen.
yeah, and I agree. And I think the stay-at-home job can be harder sometimes than the go to work
It
job.
was. Oh, believe
I
me, it was.
I know I couldn't do it. But yeah, no, I agree. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a human life that is taking a risk,
Mhm.
albeit a measured one, to help another family. We should do everything we can to protect that person.
Absolutely.
So I love that. I love that minimum, and I'd like to see the trend continue to go upward there.
I hope so. I'm trying to be a
Okay,
trendsetter.
something I'm passionate about. I think that's great. Well, I would love to ask you. I think this is a really cool opportunity to ask you with a lot of experience, and I've seen a lot of cases. If you were to meet an intended parent, whether they're going to work with your agency or not, what that were considering surrogacy, what big advice would you give them? And then, and also expand upon, what things are common mistakes or common misunderstandings.
Yeah. I think the biggest advice is one, patience. It takes a lot longer than anybody ever thinks it's going to. I think the biggest misconception people come be like, okay, so if I sign up today, I can be matched tomorrow and she can be pregnant in a month, at most. Nope, nope, not at all, right? Like it's a very, very long-tailed process. Even if you are matched right away, generally it's still going to be 4, 5, 6 months of, on the fastest scheme of things to get going. But even before you get to that point, I think a big mistake and that would be really helpful for parents is that they should reach out and interview multiple agencies. We're not all the same. I encourage people when they say that I'm their first call, I'm like, can you please make sure that you reach out to several other agencies as well? I'm like, I think I'm great. I think I'm wonderful. I have yay, great self-esteem about myself, but I want to make sure that I'm the right person and that we're the right fit and the right philosophy for you because everybody is different. And there are a lot of amazing programs out there. And so each one might be a slightly different fit for each set of parents. Also, how they do things, how they structure, how their case management is, how their, like I said, my agency fee is unique, but there are even on the traditional model of how agency fees are accepted, there's a few that are out there too. Like there's the agency fee, there's also those flat rate all-inclusive packages. And those can be really tricky if people are not, well educated and take the time to really think and compare those costs because it's an apples to oranges cost on all-inclusive packages versus a traditional agency model out there. And I say my biggest advice to parents out there is that all-inclusives are probably not as all-inclusive as you think they are. Please ask them what the limits are on the all-inclusive, because a lot of times it'll be, oh, well, it's all-inclusive up to $35,000 of a base compensation. Well, we all know right now that generally base compensation is starting at 50 or higher. And if the carrier selects 50, 55, well, you are probably paying 15 to $20,000 more right out the gate before you even realize what happened, and you're already kind of locked in and bought into this all-inclusive package. Not saying they're all that way, but it's something that you want to make sure that you're asking when you're talking to things. So interview a lot of programs would be my biggest advice to intended parents.
That's great advice. What advice would you give, or top advice items, or would you give a surrogate?
Um, I think patients also for surrogates too.
Okay.
Same thing, right? We get that exact same misconception from both sides where they go, okay, well, so if I sign up today, it was really not convenient for me to sign up today because I don't want to be pregnant next week. I'm like, oh, you will not be. Believe me, you will not be. Again, it will be at least 4 to 6 months. And also, guess what? You have control over this in some ways. So a lot of times when a carrier goes, it would be really inconvenient for me to transfer in this month. Be open, be honest, be transparent with people about those things. Because yes, intended parents desperately want to move forward, but they also understand you have a life. And so moving by one more month a lot of the time is not going to make that big of a difference. Beyond patience, I think my biggest advice to gestational carriers is to be open, honest, and transparent about everything. If you think that that miscarriage that you had before you had your kids is no big deal, it probably is not a big deal. But if you didn't bother to mention it to us as the agency, to the clinic, to the intended parents, then suddenly it becomes a big deal because the question then becomes, what else are you hiding? Are you telling the truth about everything? If you're open and transparent about everything, then everybody starts on that same page. And that's the biggest thing I see with gestational carriers is that a lot of times they don't want to talk about something. They think something is embarrassing, or they, especially if it's like unfortunately, like they had a history of childhood abuse, but it's resolved and they've seen a mental health professional. Well, they don't tell us as the agency, but they tell the mental health professional screening, who then comes back to the agency and says, did you know about this? Why didn't you disclose this to us? And we go, we didn't. And so then again, it becomes a trust issue. What else didn't you tell us? So open, honest, a lot of things really are not that big of a deal. Agencies will tell you if they are or if they aren't, but if you don't tell us about them, they become a big deal.
That's great. You mentioned earlier like interviewing multiple agencies to make sure that the style it fits what you're
Same thing
looking
with
for.
gestational carriers. Absolutely.
I think it gets to that when you talk about even the surrogate piece is you have to trust and like working with your agency. It seems like that connection with the people there matters so much, right? Because generally speaking, most journeys go really well, right?
Yep,
But when there is a snag or an issue or a misunderstanding or a complication, having the agency that you can trust to go to and guide you through them is critical. I think
absolutely.
it
And
starts with
actually,
that trust,
to
right?
that end, ask the agency, interview them, right? On both sides, you should interview them. Ask them how long their employees have been there, what is their staff turnover rate? Because if you, to your point, if you're connected with a certain case manager or an intake person or things like that, if they are there, if they've been there for 5 years or more or things like that, they're likely still going to be there, right? And I'm not saying that brand new employees, that that's a level of turnover or that that's a problem because a lot of times people grow and they're adding in team members, but do they turn over staff constantly? And so those kind of questions can really tell you, one, about the culture of the agency, right? And two, whether you, as both a gestational carrier and an intended parent, are going to feel supported throughout because you're going to have a level of consistency throughout.
Absolutely. What do you think are common areas of tension in a surrogacy journey or misunderstanding or frustration?
I mean, I think that, since you're an escrow company, I think the very obvious answer is going to be anything with money, right? It's one of the most stressful things that people can talk about. And it, So it's not necessarily the actual money part that can be the biggest misunderstanding of the frustration. It sometimes can be the interpretation of the legal agreement and how it was written and the intent behind it, because that really can make a big difference in how things are paid out. And so, the advice to kind of clear that up is make sure that everything is absolutely ironclad. If you think, oh, I trust him, we'll figure it out when we get there, I, I please don't. And I'm not saying don't trust either the intended parent or the gestational carrier. I'm saying don't trust that your interpretation is even the same at the beginning because people can change, people can get frustrated. They can, and my second biggest point of misunderstanding is anything related to medical care, right? This is huge. And so you can get frustrated about situations happening with medical care, and then all of a sudden you can go, well, fine, then I'm going to whether intentional or not, take it out using that contract and that vague language as a way to not punish, but to say, hey, you know what? Suddenly I'm just going to clamp down on this one thing that we were being a little loose about. Um, Medical, though, I mean, anything related to medical can be the hardest thing, for misunderstandings, because ultimately, if you think about like the intended parents, if they had control over the situation and all was right in the world, they'd be carrying themselves, right? No matter who they are. Same-sex couple, heteronormative couple, single parent, like any one of them would rather be doing this themselves than having somebody else do it for them. So they're essentially trusting somebody to carry their heart outside their body, right? And they at that point, making medical decisions and talking to medical providers and attending appointments and getting information. And if you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're having an anxiety attack over, is everything okay with the baby? But of course, your gestational carrier is half a country away, right? You don't have that same level of constant feedback. And so that can really cause people to become very stressed and uh, sometimes lack understanding or care for each other, then that can also lead potentially to issues in the delivery room, right? Is that if you had a misunderstanding up until that point and, already things weren't going great or, your relationship didn't go well over the medical appointments and things like that, you want to make sure that you're actually able to be in that delivery room and be part of that. Generally, I'll say even if things don't go great during the appointments, during the rest of it, most people are willing to suck it up and everybody is amazing and get to be there for that delivery, but it can be stressful sometimes.
I think your call out just to make sure everything is very well vetted, very well documented in the beginning is we see that too. But this is a human process and a scientific and a medical process, and I can't think of something that would be more could be more emotional, stressful. I mean, just the everything that with the pregnancy, the baby. I love your statement there of carrying your heart
Mhm.
outside of their body. That's really beautiful. But when you add in all those elements and the pressure and the stress, and then a whole lot of different personalities, despite the best vetting and discussions and meetings, when you get into something, things can be different. So having everything clear is really important. I always often say, please trust the professionals. And if there is a hard or challenging conversation, even if you think it might be offensive, go to the agency with it. If it's an escrow company, go to the escrow. Don't fight over these things directly with your surrogate. If you've hired this awesome team,
Right.
a professional,
That's what we're all here for. That's the point of hiring professionals.
yeah, let them have those hard conversations or mediate or because most of the time from what we see, especially on the escrow side, is most things are just misunderstandings.
Yep,
Some of these some of these items in the contracts can be confusing if you don't do it every day.
absolutely.
Um, and sometimes there is gray areas that have common paths to navigate through them. If you just trust in the professionals to have those conversations and help navigate those conversations so you can actually focus on the conversations with the surrogate or with the parent being about the future family or baby, it'll go better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, but no, I couldn't agree more. We see most issues in tension are generally a high stress personality type situation where somebody's gotten overly excited or nervous, and it really bruises the relationship and maybe becomes unreasonable, right? Because it is
We
a lot of
try not to
stress.
use that word, but
Yeah, no, but it's stressful and it's emotional. So I
yeah,
think, and that doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and we try to navigate through it. And but that's where the professionals come in and really kind of earn our stripes or do our best work. So. Since we're talking about escrow a bit here, you know, I live escrow. I wake up thinking for the last 10 years, I think about escrow every day, right? I'm often too close to it. You talk to parents all the time, probably explain what we do and why escrow matters. What misconceptions do you often hear or things people don't really understand about escrow as it pertains to our industry?
I I will say generally we work really hard to educate on our side early and often, so we don't have a lot of pushback and misconceptions about it. That we like to explain that escrow is important to have, like somebody needs to hold for both sides, right? And like so that for the parents, it protects them because it puts their money somewhere and they know that money is not being paid out unless it's per the terms of that legal agreement that they have directly with them. For the carrier, it's her side as well, right? Like she knows those funds exist on her behalf so that they will be paid out. My favorite example, and I think this stems from a conversation that you and I had a lot of years ago about like the craziest thing you'd seen submitted. And there's probably been crazier since then. But at the time, you said somebody had submitted that they had wanted an emotional support pig for expense. And of course, it wasn't in the contract. And so that's what I always tell parents is like, she can say she wants this all she wants. But if she submits that receipt, I mean, it depends on how you like, even if she submits it directly, then she's not going to get paid for it because it's not in that contract and that protects. That's the whole point. She can't just withdraw funds from a joint bank account to say, oh, well, yeah, here, I just wanted to pay for the emotional support pig. You know, the advantage to having an agency, obviously, is especially if the receipts have to flow through the agency, is you as an escrow may never see those requests because we're not even going to submit that. Adam is going to laugh at us if we even try to submit it. So we're just going to talk to her and be reasonable about it beforehand. But I think that's one of the biggest things is escrow protects both sides, and a lot of people don't realize that that is that misperception out there is that they just think, oh, well, they're just trying to money grab and take all our money. They're not. That money in that escrow account belongs to the intended parents. It is their money. If they stopped the process before she was pregnant and they walked away, that money minus whatever expenses actually had been, legitimately, if there were medical appointments or things like that, that's their money. It comes back to them. At the end of the day, when everybody goes, oh, well, why do you want $10,000 extra in there? It's a cushion to protect her in case there are unexpected expenses, but that money comes back. It does not come to me as an agency. It does not go to you as SeedTrust. It does not anywhere. It's the intended parent's money. And I think that's a big misperception.
Yeah, it's something that's come up a few times in recent conversations that we've done a really bad job explaining that our core role is actually holding the money and making sure it's administered strictly in accordance with the contract.
Yep.
Now, obviously, we play a role in disputes and we eliminate a lot of process pain around payments and all of that. But I think that is a big misconception. And I'm always shocked to hear that that's not obvious. So shame on me for not doing a better job
We
putting that in the
all know
universe.
better, do better together, right? We all
Exactly.
educate together.
But what's actually interesting about that, and I'm sure you remember this, when SeedTrust came into the space 10 years ago, the concept of what escrow has evolved to didn't exist.
Yep.
What an escrow company was back then was like kind of more like a mortgage company. They just hold the money and release upon instruction.
Yep.
And it was no checking the contracts, no checking the receipts. It was month to month ledger, checking the mail. And we said, gosh, this seems like kind of an illusion of protection that doesn't really add a lot of value. So what we really set out to do was to disrupt that and create a real financial institution, really modeled after a trust company and a bank that truly takes that fiduciary responsibility to make sure everything is administered per the contract. And I always tell people, look, if we get it wrong, it's on us. That's part of what we guarantee that if we make a mistake and we can't remedy it, then we take that loss so the parents can have that confidence. And I think even for the surrogate, some people don't like working with us because we're strict. We make sure we're going to get the documents. It's going to be in the contract, or we're going to have the appropriate approvals to release money. Um, but even for a surrogate, things that happen, and again, rarely, we talked about the process being emotional. We talked about sometimes there's misunderstandings. Well, what you want to make sure is that the escrow company under their agreement and under their responsibility is they're going to continue to pay out the obligations, even if there is a misunderstanding, and not allow the money to be a tool for somebody, one side or the other, to get what they want. Because if the surrogates do her-based comp, and there's an example I like to use is we had a situation where an attendant mother was upset that the surrogate unfriended her on Facebook. And she had contacted us and said, stop payments until I'm refriended. And uh, of course, and she said, this is a breach. And we said, well, this is not a material breach. And unless we have a formal breach and there's nothing in your contract around this, we're going to pay base comp. And of course, that was a frivolous situation and that was just an emotional situation. But if, without the right escrow company or in a scenario where the intended parent's attorney held, that would have been a big issue because they would have stopped payment most likely.
Right.
Um, those don't happen often, but I'm on any given day dealing with a lot of these situations where us having to say, look, we hear you, but the money's due, it's in the contract. Unless there is a separate and real material breach, the surrogate's going to get paid. That's our job. Um, it's really important that's in there. The other thing to make sure, I think, for a surrogate around escrow is make sure that escrow provisions in our industry are in there for a reason. You know, we had a heartbreaking scenario not long ago where the minimum balance and requirement for escrow was negotiated out of the contract. A very clever lawyer on the intended parent side got that removed. So again, this person was a litigator by nature, and there was a disagreement, but the money was still due. But they made us close they contacted us and said, close the escrow. And our initial response was, we can't close escrow. And then within minutes of our team sending that reaction, they looked, and they said, check the contract. Right? So our team went back into the contract and saw that that had all been struck from the typical contract. And that parent, because that got negotiated out, was able to close escrow and made that journey very, very miserable to
That's
get every
interesting. And I will
to get the
say this goes back sometimes to agency representation as well. It's actually in our agency agreement directly with intended parents that they will keep escrow open, and it has all of the provisions that would be negotiated into the gestational carrier agreements in our agency agreement as well. And so there's a multi that also would be a great thing to have intended parents checked. Are there multi layers of protection all the way through, or for a gestational carrier to check in? Like, wh where are those multiple layers of being protected in those contracts? Because while yes, that one goes directly there, the intended parents now have a contract with us as an agency saying that they will do that as well. So in our case, that would be an interesting because we could turn around and say, actually, this provision applies and you do still need to keep it open. And so that's an interesting academic exercise as to what would have happened if that had been our case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very rare case. We've never seen that in another case where it was utilized. But I think just trusting that these policies are in there for a reason,
Yep.
right? Um, and so these requirements should be kept in.
And shame on the gestational carrier's attorney for letting that be struck.
Yeah. No, yes. It was very frustrating.
Yeah.
Very sad. Let's take a step back.
Okay.
Let's talk about the industry as a whole. Well, we got rising prices, celebrities in the news, criminal cases with the FBI, a handful of bad actors, in other words. What's Jennifer White's reflection on the industry, what we're dealing with right now and where we're going?
It it's hard at the moment, right? That there's a lot of really bad things that are happening out there. And it's unfortunately the frequency feels like it's becoming more. I will say, I mean, yes, it's really important to talk about the bad things. Um, but the everybody likes to talk about bad news stories, right?
Right.
Nobody, it's no fun to talk about the good stories and like for the few bad apples that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of amazing, perfect journeys. That said, I think that there is absolutely an opportunity out there because unfortunately, we as surrogacy programs, we get vilified, right? Like, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you do better? And how do we know who's good in this, right? And there definitely needs to be a bright line to show who's the good guy, who maybe an okay guy, but just doesn't quite fit on the other side. I'm never going to say somebody who doesn't fit on that side of the bright line isn't also a good guy, right? But how do we determine that? How do we find that? And I definitely am really passionate about this. I know you and I have talked a lot over the years over this, that I really and truly believe that there needs to be a way to accredit or certify surrogacy programs. And at the moment, unfortunately, I know Seeds doesn't have that in place. We all promise on our, best pinky swear that we will be good human beings and we'll follow the standards, but the standards aren't all measurable, right? You can't pinky swear to, I promise to be nice to each other, right? But I really think that there's a huge opportunity out there for accreditation, certification, whatever language people want to use around it so that there's an opportunity to peek under the hood, look at these programs and say, hey, this is a really good program. So joint psychological, that's a big thing right now, right? How do you prove that? You're going to have to go and look in the books. You're going to have to say, hey, can you show me? You don't have to show me the report, but can you show me proof that you did this joint psych evaluation for all of your matches or X number of them just to show that prove that you're doing these things. There are ways to bright line prove this, but we need to get there and we need to do it. And I I feel strongly we need to do it sooner rather than later because a lot of these bad stories, somebody in the government's going to pick up and say, we need to regulate this industry. And it's not going to turn out for us as well as people think it might if that happens.
Yeah, self-regulation has been so important. Um, and I agree. The oversight and the additional requirements and checking the, the so the constituents of this industry can feel safer and know who to work with would be extremely impactful. And so a direction in time I'd love to see Seeds as an organization, which is the Society for Ethics and Indignation, achieve. And certainly is working in that direction. What's interesting is the industry's worked really hard. I think holistically, this industry is a bunch of people who care and really want to help people. And
Absolutely.
some of them come to it organically as a surrogate or a parent, or they come across the industry and say, wow, this is amazing. Love to contribute and make this my purpose. Not all of them are great business people as well. Not all of them are in it for the right reasons either. I
Absolutely.
often think the bad actors in our industry from a professional standpoint are very, very, very few, and they often get flushed out because what people outside of the industry don't know is this is a tight networked industry and there's no place to hide. And if you are an
We pretty much all know each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are a bad actor, you will get blacklisted quickly, right? So I think that is positive. You also mentioned I mentioned a lot of the bad things happening and like with the escrow fraud, the big escrow fraud, and it's bad when people are talking about escrow, I say, because we make work really hard to make escrow secure, transparent, and easy, so everybody can focus on what's more important, building the family. But the escrow frauds are totally avoidable. And those folks just weren't qualified or set up to do it properly. And if we had more requirements or education and regulation around it, they never would have been in business in the first place doing it because they weren't qualified.
Right.
Um, so or they were in a structure that should have been permitted. So I hope to see that come out here in the real near term as well, across the board, across all professionals. I like to, and you mentioned You mentioned the bad actors and hundreds and thousands of cases. I think we have these headlines, and you're right. From what I see, the news loves negative stories.
Of course. It's way more fun to talk about a horrible story than it is to
Yeah.
be like, yes, this family, they had a great relationship with their gestational carrier. Everybody was happy and had fun, and they showed up at delivery and they went home and they were a happy family of three. Like that's where's the hook in that, right?
But it's such an amazing story. And
It is an amazing
it's
story, but it
amazing.
doesn't have a news hook to it.
Yeah. No, but you know, I think for us professionals have been in the space for a while. What we're seeing, I think what we see is it's like anything. You're going to have a small percentage of bad actors or criminals trying to figure out how to utilize an industry for the wrong reason. It's so rare. It's such a small minority, like an extreme minority of cases. And part of why, like right now, I think while there's a few cases in the headlines, I think what most people lose perspective on is there's over 10,000 cases, surrogacy cases in surrogacy a year, arguably closer to 20,000 in the US. So when you think about that many happy families, and there's not an exact number there, right? But
Sure.
there's a lot of there's thousands and thousands of surrogacy journeys in the US every year. And when you think of all those successful families built, and then you have this one case
Right.
that makes the headlines because there was somebody that wanted to have a lot of kids or whatever the headline was, we got to remember that the broader good is what we're focusing on, what we need to continue to do. But we can't ignore these bad actors and we need to continue to get better so
Well,
we love it.
and due diligence and best practices, and again, research and talk to multiple. And I mean, there's been definitely a few recently, at least one where background checks weren't performed. That's what an agency is there for. They're there to protect both sides, and they should be running background checks on gestational carriers and intended parents. And some of those gestational carriers, if they had just asked around and talked to different agencies, especially in some of the other bad cases, they might have found somebody that would have made them feel more comfortable and more taken care of in their arms around them, and they wouldn't have ended up in that situation. I'm not saying that those bad people wouldn't have continued to search other ways and gotten to where they wanted to and had other victims in this, but there are ways that people, gestational carriers, parents can protect themselves by doing a lot more research and reaching out and comparing. And if it smells bad, it probably is bad.
Right. No, absolutely. All we can do is vet, follow the best practices and standards, and continue to flush out bad actors. And I think that we do that organically as an industry, but I would like to see more structure around that. I agree.
Absolutely. And these are real people, they're real lives. These are real children that are going to grow up with this narrative, and it's already publicly on display. So, like, we need to be really conscious of that as we parade this information around as well.
For sure. Yep. Any other big industry items you'd like to touch on today?
No, you got my great one that I really still think that there should be accreditation and or certification or whatever we want. That SEEDS is amazing, right? The Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy. But again, we have to self-regulate ourselves in there right now, and there's definitely some things that need some fixing. That hopefully Seeds will get to. I'm very passionate about trying to help any organization possible to get there in the end. But I think that's the biggest thing is we need that bright line. We need somebody to help us show what that bright line is.
Completely agree. It's such a great initiative to focus on. Well, Jen, thank you for your time today and for sharing all your advice and guidance. If somebody watching this video would like to learn more about your agency or get to know you better, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yep. You can go to our website, brightfuturesfamilies.com, or it can always email me directly, jwhite@brightff.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Have a
Thanks.
great day.
Thanks.